Thank you very much for joining us today at our Biotech Summit. It is our 13th annual South Dakota Biotech Summit and our first ever virtual summit. I'm Joni Johnson, the Executive Director of South Dakota Biotech, and it's a tremendous pleasure that I welcome you here with us today. Things are a bit different this year, but I think you'll find the speakers we have lined up over the next 2 days enlightening. For those of you who are not familiar with South Dakota Biotech, we are a trade association representing the biotech industry in our state. We work with state and federal government, universities, biotech companies, and their suppliers to create a robust, stable, and growing industry. First and foremost, I'm incredibly proud of how our member companies are at the forefront of innovation during this pandemic. Many are receiving national, even international recognition for their efforts. We know the days are long, and we honor you for the incredible work that you're doing. This is a historically challenging time, but it's also a time when South Dakota and the entire world is experiencing how bioscience can genuinely change lives. Thank you to all of you who are representing our industry so well. We will continue to tell your story. Over the next couple of days, we will hear from a NASA special agent, a policy advisor with SBA, local manufacturers who specialize in life science projects, updates from South Dakota research universities, and companies doing cutting-edge technologies in ag, industrial, and medical biotech. A big thank you to our sponsors, Bio, Pharma, Fisher Scientific, Frederickson and Byron, South Dakota EPSCoR, South Dakota Manufacturers Technology Solutions, and SAB Biotherapeutics. Today, let's start with our keynote speakers, Brittany Sickler and Sue Lancaster. First up is Brittany. Brittany serves as Senior Innovation Policy Advisor for the SBA's Office of Investment and Innovation. Her primary duties support the advancement of the Small Business Innovation Research, Small Business Technology Transfer, which better known as SBIR and STTR programs. They enable small businesses to explore their technological potential and profit from its commercialization. She oversees initiatives to increase understanding of SBIR, STTR opportunities with SBA offices and partner networks across the country. She also manages the agency's Federal and State Technology FAST Partnership Program. Please welcome Brittany.
Thank you, Joni. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today, especially for your first virtual summit, which did allow me to easily join from the other side of the country. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. Really happy to be here talking about SBIR, and especially in the context of opportunities and possibility here for the future. Before I jump in, I did want to make a small background comment that while I am currently based in DC at SBA's headquarters, I am originally from North Dakota, and so now that I'm out here, often talk about the Dakotas together, and so was especially happy to hear of the great work that's going on now across all of the partners that are involved in South Dakota Biotech. So some of you I know, but many of you I don't, and appreciate this opportunity to connect. So I'm going to jump into the presentation now, and I'll go through a bit of the background of SBIR, kind of the why it exists, and part of SBA's involvement. Really looking forward to conversation after my presentation with Sue and Joni again, really trying to dive deep into what we're able to do here together. So next up, many of you may have heard the acronyms as we go through SBIR and STTR. You know, we often do talk about America's Seed Fund, but everyone has a bit of a different experience. Some of you may have been around for the full, 36, now 38 years of SBIR's existence, 28 years of STTR. Some of you might be newer and kind of hear stories, and for better or for worse, might know a bit about some of the possibilities of receiving funding and what that actually makes happen. So today, part of what I want to do kind of on the side is a bit of demystifying SBIR and really trying to pull out bits across the agencies and across those possibilities. So back to that why of the government and why SBA, what are we doing here with SBIR? And I'll just say off the bat here, when I talk about SBIR, it's usually encompassing both and try not to have too much acronym fatigue. And so typically we're talking about the umbrella, but I'll say SBIR. So the next slide, why, really looking at what's that impact, how can we help startups, small businesses transform those high-risk, high-impact technologies? And that's kind of on the forefront. On the back end, how is the government able to benefit from that and see that instilled in their mission areas? And I'll go into a little bit more of those deeper goals, but it's incredible to see what's possible when we do have that partnership, when we do have that seed funding to get things going. So I'm going to go next slide too. While Joni even mentioned here a few different areas, SBIR is wide in technology in terms of what's able to be funded through the SBIR programs across agencies. And I'll get into those agencies here in a moment. But when I first kind of joined the innovation R&D world, for me, it was a little bit challenging to wrap my mind around all of the different areas where SBIR was involved. So I have some here on the screen, but you'll see it can be surprising, maybe not so surprising. To be honest, even these kind of words here, there's many companies and many researchers, individuals, organizations that are behind all of these kinds of technologies and in a variety of ways. Some impacting our daily lives directly, some more indirectly, and many of these across the world. So next, looking at just our agenda for today, just giving you a heads up of some of the things that I want to make sure we can cover. And I'll try to keep it engaging and moving along. Although we are not all together in the same room, we can still feel together here online in the space that Joni's allowed us to come together. So we'll do just a little bit of background, enough where I'm hoping that people can kind of be able to navigate the waters a little bit better, both as a potential applicant. I know many of you might be interested in SBIR funding, or as a partner or supporting organization. And so we talk a lot about the innovation ecosystem and all of the different stakeholders. And so I'm just happy here today that I know in the audience, I believe every person involved can either can play a role. So either as someone who's actually working on the technologies themselves or supporting those entrepreneurs and early companies that are making things happen. So we'll dive into a little bit of the application in terms of the kinds of applicants and challenges, looking a bit at topics, and really trying to help understand where there are resources and assistance for anything that might happen after today. Next is our team at SBA. So many of you may have heard about SBIR at a specific agency, and so you might know well the SBIR programs at NIH, for instance, or perhaps you've been involved at Department of Energy or in DoD at the Defense Health Agency, or a wide variety of other agencies. And you may think, oh, I haven't heard of SBA's program. Well, the first thing I'll say is that SBA doesn't have its own SBIR program in terms of SBIR funding that's going out to companies. Our role is a coordinating hub. If you can imagine an agency, an office where our agency's mission is to help small businesses start and grow. So it's a bit of a natural fit for us to kind of pull together across SBIR and, on behalf of small businesses, be able to speak into those agency programs, tying together policy. So much of what we do, and I won't go through every bullet here on the slide, but providing that oversight. So when legislation is coming out, we produce a policy directive. Agencies come to us for a variety of notices or updates. They report all of their data. So every kind of award that's come through for SBIR is public in terms of the basic information of the company and the abstract. And so we'll do analysis on that. We kind of keep track of trends or even point to places where the agencies and even Congress in terms of the intent of the program want to see kind of what's going on. So just last month in August, we worked with the National Women's Business Council and produced kind of the first ever report from our end on women's participation in SBIR and STTR programs. So it breaks it down by agency, goes back into the data, talks about agency outreach and partner outreach. And so I don't have a link for that here, but you can definitely find it on sbir.gov. The other kind of part of the house that we're working on, we're not looking at policy, is the area where I'm more involved, and that's in the innovation ecosystem. So working with what we call SBIR support organizations. So much of my mission is trying to work with networks and institutions and entities across the country to help build that SBIR pipeline. So working with potential applicants, especially first-time awardees or individuals from underrepresented groups. We look a lot at the situation around women, minority founders in rural areas, and how can we have better prepared applicants submitting more competitive proposals so that we have really just a high crop of technologies and kind of those cutting edge ideas being funded. And so we have a couple programs, FAST, a grant program for organizations, and we work with accelerators around the country, and we've had many strong partners in South Dakota through the years. We also provide training, really trying to help people access that information, especially when you're dealing with a complex world like SBIR, and knowing that SBIR is not kind of the only option typically when we're looking at how are you funding your next generation technology. So those are some of the things that we're really focused on. And by being here today, hoping that if there are any potential connections that we can provide some of those opportunities, or at least be able to kind of exchange that information. All right, next slide. So I try not to have so many slides with full of text, but some people really do appreciate the background of, okay, where are these dollar amounts coming from? What can I expect of that in the future? And kind of looking at that sustainability aspect is where I come with these. Currently, and this is because it has changed in the past, but currently SBIR, it's not just on a whim in terms of what agencies are funding, or at least the amounts that they're funding. SBIR is just a small percentage of an agency's overall external or extramural research budget. And so we have 3.2% for agencies that have at least $100 million a year in that external R&D, and the idea is for that to go to small businesses and very agile innovators being able to commercialize. So instead of you know, kind of going straight and into a university or another kind of entity, you know, there's often those partners, and you'll kind of hear throughout my talk here this morning how working together obviously does have such a bigger impact. But kind of positioning SBIR to have that ability to develop the technology and get it out into the world. And so that, both the percentage has grown slightly over the years, and then the overall amount as agencies' R&D budgets are growing. So the last, I even talked with Joni, mentioned when I started a few years back, our point was about $2.5 billion a year across the two programs. And now we're at over $4 billion a year. So a very significant increase of the last 3 years. STTR is a separate program, but very much so related in terms of the kind of the core of the program is the same as SBIR. What you're going to have different is a requirement to partner with a nonprofit research institution. And some of the agencies kind of use their STTR programs in different ways. They might set aside very specific but different topics for STTR. And the reason we don't talk about it quite as much is that it's less, and since it's so similar to SBIR in terms of the intent, that we kind of lump them together. But we only have 5 agencies of the smattering of agencies that participate in STTR because they're the ones who have to have over $1 billion in external R&D, but still over about $480 million a year. And so all of that is going to small businesses who have to be the applicant and the awardee in terms of being eligible for the program. So next up is some of the goals I've already been trying to reference here kind of throughout. And so there's a lot of things going on at one time, quite a few layers in terms of looking at federal R&D, looking at commercialization, and trying to just foster this overall you know, look at innovation and in the future, and especially now in 2020, much of the talk across our agencies and with our partners is as we look into strengthening the economy from here on out, what kinds of companies have that are poised to have that kind of impact. And so Joni is mentioning as well, just the kinds of companies that can really build not only the economy, but also, you know, in the United States, but also across into the world, and really strengthen areas. And so particularly in the Midwest, where, you know, there might not be as many or the kinds of institutions that are talked about in other parts of the country. At this point, it doesn't matter in the sense that there's so much that's going on or that's able to be accessed across the country. So having the right kinds of partners and people who can fill in those gaps. We're seeing some incredible gains in states that traditionally have been more underrepresented in terms of SBIR awards, and it's something that we would like to see continue. Next. These are all the agencies. Also not an exciting slide in a sense, but just to give an idea of, okay, we looked at a little bit of those topic areas. There's many different technologies in terms of topic areas that agencies are putting out and saying, we have funding, we want companies to compete for this funding, to respond with their you know, with how they would solve it, with their solutions to some of these really large challenges. But one thing I'll mention here is that while you might recognize an agency's name or even understand or interact with them and you can say, well, I know their mission area, SBIR can surprise you in a sense because you might not realize some of these agencies actually have a wide purview. And they'll at times, you know, use SBIR to address things, you know, kind of across the board. So I'll give USDA, for example. You know, there's many, well, USDA is a very large agency, and there's many different kind of parts and sub-agencies to that department. Well, USDA in their SBIR program has everything from, you know, small farms, fisheries, to community rural development. And so you can imagine their topic areas are more so buckets where people are proposing. And then you have the Department of Energy, which people might say they only have, you know, strict energy projects, but you look at some of their topics and it also covers a wider expanse than just kind of simple energy production or storage. So my big, I would say one of my big pushes is for people to somewhat open their mind in terms of what's possible and not self-select out too soon. In terms of seeing if there's an opening and seeing if there's funding available. So next, we have all of those agencies have different budgets in SBIR, as I mentioned the percentage. And this I just think is helpful because, you know, not all agencies have as many topics as each other or as many opportunities throughout the year. And so you'll look at DoD, which really, if I had another slide, I would break out DoD into the services and components because there's quite a bit going on, and there's separate SBIR programs underneath, you know, that DoD umbrella. And across that, it's everything from Missile Defense Agency to, as I mentioned earlier, the Defense Health Agency. And then you have open topics in Air Force and kind of wider topics happening in Navy, and there's just a lot of changes throughout DoD, and so it's not as kind of cut and dry in terms of, oh, I've never worked with you know, kind of DoD or military before, I don't think I would be a fit. Actually, the current state is very different, and the budget there is definitely increasing in terms of SBIR, and I think it's also becoming a little bit more open, and they're looking for more kinds of kind of new companies than you may have seen traditionally in the past. And then throughout, obviously, even the small agencies, though, I on the flip side, shouldn't overlook them too soon because even though they have smaller budgets overall, there are also still some interesting opportunities, and their program managers are also easy to access. And so really trying to kind of wade the waters of, okay, now that I'm somewhat interested, I've seen some connections with the topic areas or the technology areas, you know, how do I go about tackling there's so many agencies, you know, how do I even go about approaching this? And so that's why we work with our partners, and that's why we try to have quite a bit of information for people to say, all right, each agency is almost like a different person, and so how do I find that fit? You know, half the agencies are contracting agencies, half are granting agencies, but we talk across SBIRs, they're all awards, they're all non-dilutive funding. but there might be a better fit at one for you than another. And so hopefully that can be kind of part of today and part of your journey as well. Next, I talk in a lot of general terms because as we start to dive down, there are many differences. And so my apologies for that. What I try to do is kind of twist it into be a very positive thing. All right, since there are differences, there might be, even as I was mentioning, there might be a better fit. But certain things are across the board, and that is SBIR has 2 phases of SBIR funding possible, with the third phase being separate from SBIR in a sense, but towards that goal. So all agencies have kind of an initial, the first phase, which typically is more on the proof of concept, and it can vary in terms of how far along a technology is or an idea is. But as you get to know the agencies, it does become a little bit more clear. There's a very wide range as well of funding. Some of the agencies are doing smaller phase 1 awards to kind of test things out, so kind of more maybe smaller ideas. Certain agencies know that the technologies that they want to fund need a certain level of even just that startup capital, and so you will see a difference there, typically around 6 months to a year. Now, phase 1 doesn't always guarantee that you'll get a phase 2. There's still some competition, and if you're really into numbers, we have our annual reports on SBIR.gov, and we even do analysis of phase 1s and phase 2s at each of the agencies. You can even dive down a little bit deeper to see some of the odds or the transition rate. Phase 2 is more of that prototype development, more of what's being created, whether the agency wants to take that in eventually, or if they want just to see that developed and head to market. And so on the phase 2 side, we're looking at, typically on the low side of 500,000 up to, I think, even 1.7 million now. And then there's some additional side programs I won't go into detail on, but if you do hear of, additional phase 2s or phase 2Bs, you might also hear of other programs like a phase 0, where DOE, I think, has a few slots even left, where they're helping applicants fund their proposals, the proposal development, essentially. So how can you get assistance to put that proposal together to stand out? And I know that they did target certain states and communities, and so I believe definitely South Dakota would be included in that. But the phase 1, phase 2 are what you're going to find across, and then phase 3 is something that if we have more time, we could definitely dive into a little bit deeper today. But phase 3 is not SBIR funding. It is kind of that additional. It's a commercialization, whether that's kind of additional investment, selling, or a contract with the government. So certain technologies are kind of anticipated, expected, and wanted by those agencies I talked about. So especially we'll look at NASA and across the DoD. And the phase 3 is amazing. It's sole source. So essentially, if you've competed and you've already competed for phase 1 or 2, and if that technology is brought through and it's extended or completed, the agency can have a phase 3, and it's really much easier for both the company and the agency. And then there's a whole other kind of bunch of benefits with that too, in terms of even if your company is sold, your technology still retains that phase 3, so there's no size standards in getting a sole source phase 3. And then any agency can also use a phase 3 in terms of it doesn't have to even be an SBIR agency or the one that you hopefully got funding from. And so I even have conversations with agencies that call me up. They don't know anything about SBIR, and they say, I've heard this myth that we want to use, let's say it's a new kind of database structure, like it was a new technology, and they'll say, we found this company and they said we could do this, and I don't believe it. And so we've worked with them before, and it's really incredible to see those things kind of take root. All right, so next slide. I already talked about the phase 3 benefit, that direct follow-on, but there's also benefits in terms of data rights for the company. And, when I talk about non-dilutive capital, and so that's kind of goes back to that origin of America's Seed Fund, and the fact that many of the technologies are pre-VC, so very high risk, and not always or not across the board, but in terms of studies that have been done, many of the technologies would not have had funding to the level that they did elsewhere, especially proving them out. And so you know, for a company to be able to take that and then hopefully, you know, later on build, and if they get further investment, they have retained their equity. The government's benefited in myriad other ways. So next is SBIR companies. Look very different. There's many different kinds of companies, as you can imagine, but they're going to be that small business. And so they're going to follow those standards with the majority of work done in terms of in the United States and performing that R&D. So we're not looking at, you know, just getting kind of that end funding to distribute or to manufacture, but really looking to make that big leap and kind of have that backing to be able to prove something out. So next up, it's, you know, as much as we try to simplify and make it sound very accessible, obviously there are challenges, and I think our team is very honest about those. And so finding those funding opportunities we know can be hard, especially as the agencies sometimes have their changes. Doing everything from your registrations to submitting, getting the right kind of proposal assistance, understanding those details really can be a challenge, especially if you're looking at other options. And if you're working with a company that's looking at, I mean, you're already dealing with challenges across, let's say, your research in general. And so finding the right kinds of partners or opportunities can be hard. And so these are the kinds of things that we're trying to tackle, and then we're also looking to work with folks like you to be able to tackle them. Next up, then the next two slides are just pointing out, you know, you can go through SBIR.gov and find everything about the topics in the past. You can see what kinds of agencies are funding different technologies. On the next slide, looking for awards, you can even search, you know, all of the companies that received SBIR funding in South Dakota or neighboring states. You can kind of try to dive down deeper into, you know, so I know certain agencies are funding topics, but what kinds of awards are happening in those topics. And so you can do a little bit of that. Unfortunately, some of the agencies have a bit more delays with their data, so we're not able to keep it up to date in terms of to the day. So we do have a little bit of lag based off of when we get information from the agencies, but you will see kind of full data through 2018, almost 2019. And then next slide, I'm going to go through the next few slides a little bit quicker here, just because here, you know, we're looking at there's so many large companies now that originally were small, competed for SBIR funding, were able to transition in incredible ways. And so I like to say, you know, it's good for us to think big and to have some of that aspiration or know of the larger, you know, this is what's possible. But there's many other companies you might not have heard of, but they're still, you know, having that transformative impact. So you can go to SBIR.gov and see the showcase and hopefully be inspired as well. And hopefully we can have some more companies come our way from South Dakota. Now the next two slides, a little bit about, you know, in the COVID environment, obviously that is very, very timely in terms of the impacts that are going on around the country. And so our team has been working with the agencies and also working with kind of our support organizations as kind of had to shift some of the everything from programming to also looking at some of the funding opportunities. And so on the next slide, we've had a few of the agencies had kind of COVID specific topics right away. Some are SBIR specific, many in the non-SBIR world, but you'll see that if you go to the site of SBIR.gov/coronavirus. But really, as I mentioned earlier, how can we position, you know, SBIR as this kind of growing dollar amount of support for companies to be able to have those companies not only successfully compete for SBIR dollars, but, you know, the goal is to build that beyond. So how can those companies really go into commercialization, grow, not only developing you know, things that are changing our daily lives and health and transportation and new materials, but also kind of building the companies that can have an outsized impact, right? So as we're looking at the kinds of jobs in STEM and advanced manufacturing, really seeing SBIR as a great kind of a great pathway for any kind of cities, states, areas around the country to be able to kind of bring in that support. So where do we go from here? Kind of the next few slides. I'll just mention on the next slide, if you are interested to dive deeper, talk to agencies, you'll see that we have 2 more virtual weeks left. And so there is a virtual week. Normally we're on a bus for the road tour, but this year now any of you can kind of travel to us in October. The Midwest stops, we don't have a specific stop to South Dakota, but all of those hosts of that week have offered other states, other companies to join in. And so we'll have one day kind of diving deeper in SBIR, but also opportunities for one-on-ones if you're interested in talking with a specific agency. I recommend you check that out right away before those spots fill up. And then the next slide, we're trying to better talk about our partners. So we have some amazing partners maybe on today, but you can definitely find them online as we're trying to connect better across state entities, university support, nonprofit, even with some of the kind of traditional business support, but how can those networks help kind of a high-tech entrepreneur? And so we dive deeper into that in our local assistance section. And then next slide. This is just a quick update for those who are actually, I think it might be the next slide, or I might have missed this slide. Unfortunately, we did have a lab to market slide intended for this, where we're doing our team's doing a competition to really kind of pull out amazing stories across the R&D innovation ecosystem. And so I can follow up with Joni later, but if any of you are working to kind of bring together, especially on the inclusive side where you're able to make amazing things happen. We have 2 recognition prizes for work that people have been doing that we really want to lift up. Yep, and you can even go to SBIR.gov and you'll see it on the homepage. And then we have an ideas prize for people who want to make this R&D innovation ecosystem better and stronger in terms of the connections and using federal resources. So I'll stop there because I could go on and on, but I'm really excited to have Sue here next up, who's also going to be talking about SBIR, and then I know we'll have time after that for some questions. So thank you so much for listening. I'm definitely excited to see what can happen here in the future.
Thank you so much, Brittany. We appreciate you giving us some insights. We hear about SBIR. Many of our companies do SBIR and STTR grant applications, and it can be very intimidating sometimes. So your expertise was very helpful. Please, everyone on the call, be thinking of some questions, because as Sue is done, I will go ahead and read off some of those questions that you may have. Please use Brittany and Sue as you have them here in front of you to help you out with your projects. Next up is Sue Lancaster, the Vice President of Corporate Development for South Dakota Innovation Partners, which is an early stage venture capital management company. Excuse me, I'm guessing most of you know of Sue, but she's responsible for risk management and market expansion across a portfolio of health and nutrition companies. Today, Sue is going to talk about her experience with SBIR and STTR grants for the companies she works with at South Dakota Innovation Partners. Sue?
Thanks, Joni, and thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Brittany, for that overview. I'll add to what Brittany shared with some firsthand experience applying to and managing SBIR grants. Next slide. So government funding is a great way to help advance your technology or small business. And the Small Business Innovation Research Grants, the SBIR program, is one of the most popular. Our companies, MedGene Labs and Prairie Aquatech, which both are now at commercial scale, have nearly a 10-year history proposing to and winning SBIR grants from a variety of the agencies. Those include National Institute of Health, Department of Homeland Security, United States Department of Agriculture. These awards allowed us to de-risk and develop new technology, as well as contribute to learning if we were solving for a true market need, solving a problem for a price that the customer would pay, as well as it created momentum for us to seek private capital. However, there were also instances with other technologies in our portfolio where we learned we had too big of a gap to fill in order to commercialize, or the market need wasn't nearly as big as we first thought. However, in those cases, we either pivoted or it made sense for us to stop investing time and money. So the two figures shown here are two ways to look at the valley of death, or often the period where failure often occurs, and how the SBIR program may be one mechanism to support you. There's no brighter light than receiving an SBIR Phase 2 award when you're sitting in the valley of death. So I lean towards figure 2 for this discussion. So you can see that there's two dips in that figure. And that's really two opportunities for this conversation, that for all of you on the call, there may be some people early on at the research stage at the university, and what you're trying to do is get funding to overcome the valley of death, to get to where you license that technology to somebody and they take it on to scale it and do commercial business opportunities. The second dip, you're also going to see a valley of death when you're taking that from technology transfer and trying to move that to a commercial operating business or scaling that product. It's an important distinction, as the valleys may have some similarities, but the scale, the risk, and the amount of capital needed are often significantly different. And so the SBIR, both on figure 1 and figure 2, particular in figure 1, if you look at the public sector, this is where SBIR comes into play and is very helpful to start vetting your technology, as I talked about, to start getting you through those moments in the valley where you may be looking for angel funding, pre-seed, early seed stage capital for you to find momentum and growth. Next slide. So one of the key SBIR questions I get, as well as South Dakota Bio gets from our members, is how do I get started? So you have your technology in hand. So first, it really does make sense, as I think Brittany alluded to as well, is to reach out to the program manager, understand where you're applying, what fit do you have in that, under that RFP or request for a proposal. And then after that, you really just go into doing online registration. How does that happen? There's a lot of documents required, a lot of things that are needed in order to do that, but SBIR.gov, as well as what Brittany alluded to, offers clear tutorials for you to be successful. Next, you want to understand the grants requirement. What sections are required? Who's best suited to write those sections? What letters of support will be most helpful and from who? Who will write the commercialization plan? Do I need to add people to my team? Who should we collaborate with? So you must prove that you know the steps to be successful, and also assemble that and who and what is required to execute successfully. Technology and business alignment. I can't stress this enough, but propose on topics that align with your company and technology strategic initiatives and goals. It's important to stay focused so that you're accomplishing what your business and technology needs to be done versus just falling under a current grant proposal. And so stay focused until a reason is discovered to pivot. Be prepared for funding downtime. This is a lesson learned in my instances, is both as you wait for your first award, but between phase 1 and phase 2, there'll be downtime. And that's critical for your development cycle and the momentum that you likely have after a phase 1 award. And so understand going into it what you can do, what resources you need, because there will be a funding downtime. And so that will delay your development cycle. Submitting a grant, do not wait until last minute. I still need to take this advice, but there are generally errors your first few submissions and it causes delays. And so that's just a lesson learned. And like I said, speaking from too many experiences on that. And grant management. So ensure you have a plan in place to report on milestones, the use of your funds. Your performance will really set you up for better or worse, to receive phase 2 funding and beyond, even into private capital. So while all of this may seem a little overwhelming, it's more than manageable to accomplish. And there are state and federal resources available to assist. So please feel free to reach out to Brittany, myself, or Joni, and we would be happy to help direct you to that assistance. So I look forward to your questions and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Sue. With that, I do have a couple questions I'd like to ask you, and please feel free to type in the Q&A or the chat box any questions that you guys might have and have thought of, because you are by far the experts. But both you, Brittany, and Sue have talked about the challenges. But I'm curious, what are some of the common mistakes that you have seen from people that have written or submitted proposals?
Oh, unfortunately, Joni, there's many mistakes, but there's quite a few actually in our SBIR, the virtual week that we go through. We have a panel with the program managers, and I hate to say it's actually my favorite panel because mistakes obviously are not something that you look for, but talking about other people's mistakes where you don't have to go through them yourself, I think is definitely is ideal. But you know, Sue alluded to some of the sections in the proposals. You know, what we see is, you know, or what I hear from agencies at least, is that someone who's applying doesn't quite know how to adapt, you know, what they're trying to build in terms of like language around it to the agency. And so being able to talk about your innovation and why it's competitive and why it should be funded, it is a challenge. And so that's why we do try to do so much in terms of supporting. So those are that's a bigger thing. Some of the smaller things is, you know, the time involved. It's a huge lift. So having enough time, I always joke with people to just lie to yourself about the due date. You know, it's like a wedding where if you show up half an hour late, it's over. You know, with SBIR, if it doesn't go through in time, it's over. And so those are some really sad mistakes on that end. But I could go on more. But Sue, I think you've probably seen some of those firsthand yourself.
No, and I agree with you, Brittany, on that. Just the general preparation for submission, because a lot can go wrong just by uploading things the wrong way. So it's always good to give yourselves time. The other thing that we saw be maybe the transformative point in terms of not receiving funds to receiving funds is really identifying who should write what section. So when we're talking about commercialization, it helps to have someone with that experience to really frame how you're going to do that and how you're going to be successful. But equally as important is the technology objectives and how you're going to accomplish that, because you want to prove that you're credible in both of those sections. And I've definitely written sections that I should not have. And when you look back and reflect on, you know, how you could have made that better, getting advice on the front end from people that have that experience will definitely get you farther down the road.
Excellent. We did have a question from Becky Airstrup. Sue, what do you wish you would have known as you wrote your first SBIR proposals?
Great question. The few things that come to mind are, one, everything that's involved in accomplishing it. So it sounds simple, but when I speak about letters of support and collaborators, in order to do those successfully or bring those into the grant successfully, there's a lot of documentation required. And so ensuring you do all of that on the front end in terms of knowing what's required would be a big lesson learned from your first SBIRs, as well as that uploading practice. And then part 3 of that would just be ensuring you have the right resources and team members to both write the sections, but then execute on the section. So having a strong project manager, knowing that they know how to direct traffic so that you achieve the objectives that you laid out.
Brittany, do you want to add on to that?
No, I think for, you know, just to add is, if you are looking at your very first SBIR proposal, I know Sue can't help everyone probably with her bandwidth, but looking for people who have gone through it and asking those questions and trying to learn from those, I think is key. So it's obviously another to do on the giant list, but it can really pay off dividends in terms of, you don't have to go through all of that on your own. As well as bringing in those partners. So, I know they just had the question from Becky. We have Gary Archambault. I know Mel Usted is involved. There's people I've worked with for many years that are fantastic at helping people put together proposals.
Yep, and are great resources to use locally.
Absolutely. And I know that most of you use Gary Archibald or Mel Usted, but make sure that if you need their contact information, feel free to reach out to me. We'll connect you definitely, because we want you to succeed. We want you to have success. Steve Lewis says, asking about the EPA. If a small company has already been around for 45 years and has tried to work on new analytical methods with the EPA, but they've not been able to cross the chasm of death on getting analytical proposals accepted, would they still have options on SBIR funds to vet methods approved within a government agency? And also, how do small companies get their technology recognized within existing government agencies like the EPA?
Sure. So I'll kind of start at the end of that. You know, I think a challenging thing overall, even for me, working closely with agencies is trying to work with them at times, right? Trying to see where there's fit or a program, kind of that alignment. And so with SBIR, I do want to remind, or at least bring up, that SBIR is not the only way agencies are working with small businesses. It's definitely not the only way that they're funding research. And so while a company might have an amazing idea and think, wow, this would be a perfect fit, you know, for the Department of Transportation, DOT's SBIR program might not be interested, and not because it's not valid, but because that's not how they've structured their SBIR program, and that's not how they have their funding go out. So it can be a bit of a frustration, but that's why we do try to break down. We have some tutorials even on SBIR.gov looking at the agencies. And so, all right, if we're just looking at SBIR, you know, here's kind of how you're going to be able to access that. Now, beyond SBIR, many of our partners do track some of those opportunities and try to help navigate. But unfortunately, we don't have a solid roadmap, as things are often changing when we're looking beyond the SBIR program. So if you're looking at a technology and it kind of fits the SBIR, you know, feeling, and perhaps EPA is not, you know, going to work there, then I do recommend looking at some of the other agencies. So some agencies might have those very specific topics, but if it's highly, set for commercialization, you know, looking at the National Science Foundation, which has very broad buckets. Like I said, in DoD, we're getting some open topics. USDA has these broader bucket areas. So there are some kind of tips and tricks for how you might be able to align your technology with an opportunity. And then the more that you get to kind of know some of those agencies, if you can have, those one-on-one sessions. I know EPA is going to participate in our next virtual week. They might be able to give you some insight into other areas in their agency as well.
Yeah, I might just add, we've seen before, and I think Brittany alluded to that, is finding another agency. It may be a smaller dollar amount, but it would at least allow traction to occur. And then on the flip side of that, also finding someone that has served on the review panels for those agencies. They often have, confidential in terms of what they review, but in terms of what generally is missing from those proposals, they often provide insight that is new and novel to how to approach it.
So that's a great point. So I want to add one thing to the reviewers. So if you can find reviewers, even outside of your direct area, but talking to reviewers is great. And then also, I know some of the agencies are always looking for reviewers. So if there's folks on the call now that maybe aren't going to propose, but you still enjoy SBIR and you like to be fascinated by new ideas, some of the agencies use external reviewers. So I know our friends at NSF and NIH, they're looking for subject matter expertise. And so there's an opportunity for you to kind of come in, review, learn the process, and then we can have you help, as Sue is recommending as well, with the companies that are yet to come.
Excellent. Another question. What are the major differences between BBIR and STTR?
I'm assuming SBIR and STTR there, and I should have included a chart. We have this up on SBIR.gov, kind of a handy chart in terms of percentages, but really the main part that I usually start from is STTR does require that partnership with a nonprofit research institution. So what you'll see, and this is where it can get confusing in SBIR, you're going to have the company subcontract or use a variety of partners, and often universities are involved in terms of some of the research that's taking place. Well, STTR does require that a certain part also take place under that kind of umbrella. it does allow for, when you get down into the nuance, it does allow for kind of more investigation from, outside the company. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, the company that has the full umbrella, and Sue might be able to even get into this a little bit better. But mainly it's going to be on that percentage of work requirement of the small business, some of the research, partner entities, kind of across what the agency requires. And then what I mentioned earlier too, you'll see that STTR opportunities, some of the agencies might have kind of a different focus for the things that they want funded under STTR. So it will be a kind of a separate application. And so you'll see a separate topic area listed.
Sue, do you have any other comments?
Brittany captured it well, and I think the only thing to add to it is it probably just depends on which stage you're at in technology development as well, because the STTR sometimes lends itself, as she alluded to, in terms of the collaboration being required and how that's conducted, versus the SBIR, where there's likely a small business, or there is a small business that's been formed, and they may need most of that capital within the business, versus separating that out between partnerships.
Okay. Do companies or people, individuals, researchers need to have an already defined end product prototype created and validated before they can write an SBIR or STTR?
No. In fact, most don't. And so that kind of goes back to what takes place with the funding. So the challenge here is no, but sometimes it is possible. And so what you'll see in a lot of the topic areas, I think the agencies are looking to kind of flesh out what are these ideas. And so how are you proving it works? How are you even developing prototypes? And how are you, even in prototype development, how are you creating a technology you can test out for certain environments? And so you'll see that as kind of what's being funded. It is R&D that's taking place, although depending on the kind of technology, the kind of testing and building is going to vary. But what you'll see is that people have kind of built a prototype. It really, what I see, at least in SBIR, is there's not as much of an opportunity unless you are trying to have that, fit somewhere very different. So let's say you are able to prove and say, I have a background, I'm very strong in this technology area that my team is, we're very competitive, and we've started to build out this capability here, but now we want to apply it to the space environment. And so we'd like to use this SBIR funding, to be able to prove that this technology would be of benefit and use on the International Space Station, or, as an example. And so one thing that you'll want to keep in mind is, for the most part, if you have already done all the work and you're just looking to get it out, SBIR is not going to kind of be the path for that. But if you're looking to, make those adjustments, test it, have it validated, then there might be an opportunity.
Yeah, I echo Brittany's comments on that. Most of the work that we've used to apply for an SBIR have been bench scale data that's been generated, where the feasibility seems to be there, but there's a lot of validation work that needs to be done, both in the market, but also on the technology side as well. So that sets you up nicely to achieve what you need to achieve in phase one, and then be at a point for maybe more expansion in phase two.
And that, to follow up with that, how much due diligence in the market, on market research and customer discovery, does someone need to do prior to applying? How much in the weeds do they need to get into?
I laugh a little bit, because we invest and apply to grant funding as well. And so we put a heavy emphasis on that, just from a commercialization standpoint. But on the front end, it is a learning opportunity. And a lot of people probably don't have that due diligence done, but it'd be good to have some of it done to know where you fit in the marketplace, especially for that commercialization section. Which brings up a really important point, is if anyone's ever done an NSF grant and participated in the Lean Startup School through that programming, I would highly recommend that, because it helps your chances for funding, but also takes you through the business model canvas, and is a great experience for somebody that maybe hasn't been exposed to the market and solving a customer problem prior. And so I would encourage that.
Yes, so Sue was referencing a little bit too of NSF's use of I-Core, and they have kind of a version of that they run through with their SBIR awardees. Some of the other agencies also really value that, and I think the push towards having more commercialization or documenting that has been a bit of a shift over the years. So agencies are starting to say, all right, how can we either fund some commercialization efforts on top of the award? How can we better situate, especially our companies that are maybe not coming in with that business experience off the bat, but they're incredibly intelligent and they're bringing that research background, but how can we kind of fill in that gap that Sue mentioned?
We just have a few minutes left, and my last question for you is, if someone approached you today and said they will be submitting an SBIR or STTR proposal, and you could only give them one piece of advice, what would that be? Brittany?
Oh, so much advice. If I had to boil it down, I would say, find that support around you. I would say definitely look for some of the entities, individuals we've mentioned today, and that advice, because going all alone in SBIR is a very hard road.
I would have similar advice. It would be get started now, and also utilize resources, because it'll go a lot smoother working with people that have been there and done that.
Excellent. Well, I would like to thank you both ladies for your time and your expertise. For those of you on the call, please make sure you reach out to me or to Sue or Brittany if you have any questions. Hopefully this has been educational for you and you've learned a few things. So we thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joni. Thank you, Sue.
You bet. So next up, we are going to have an update on bioprocessing transformation that is a partnership between South Dakota State University and South Dakota Mines. With us today for this update is Ralph Davies. He is the Vice President for Research at the South Dakota Mines and a professor in the Department of Geology and Geological Engineering. So please welcome Ralph. Oh, just a second, I'm going to get Ralph on. Here we go. Hi, Ralph.
Hi, thanks, Joni.
You bet.
Glad to be here. Can I share my screen? Says you've got to let me share my screen.
Okay. There you go.
Great. This will be brief. I just wanted to give everybody an update of where we're at in the process of developing this research infrastructure for the state focused on biotransformation. And so in the last legislative session, the legislature and the governor approved $1 million that went to the Board of Regents, and then ultimately from there as a contract to the research park at South Dakota State University. And the goal of these resources was to develop a process and get the architectural and engineering work done and lay the groundwork for developing this research infrastructure at the research park at South Dakota State. It's a partnership between South Dakota State and South Dakota Mines, as Joni indicated, and we're really thrilled and happy to be involved with this and as it moves forward. The focus of the biotransformation facility, we used $150,000 that was appropriated through the Board of Regents last winter to create a roadmap, and we engaged a firm called Strategic Avalanche. And Strategic Avalanche met with stakeholders and partners, industry, faculty from both campuses, and came up with an overall roadmap for where we thought we needed to head with this. And that overarching roadmap suggested that the areas that are prime for us would be in the reusing our ag feedstocks, corn, soybean, whatever kind of biomaterials as a feedstock, and then our woody products out of the Black Hills and those regions where we've got forestry going on. So the excess woody products, to transform them into secondary markets to gain some additional traction for industrial base in the state of South Dakota. And so we are thrilled to be engaged in this. And so since March, we've been interacting with a group called MAG Partners, which are the development wing of the research park and the management wing of the research park. And then also with the architectural and engineering firm, Clark Ingerson. And those two groups have developed at this point a floor plan for the structure. And so I'll scroll down. So down here in the violet and the gray is the portion that would be the biotransformation center of this new building at the research park. It's 2 stories, approximately 40,000 square feet, and it consists of high bay space and a number of bioprocessing lab facilities that would be co-used. That would be the fermenters and the grinding equipment and other things to get the feedstocks into shape to move in, and then the fermentation facilities, and then a number of wet laboratories that the researchers would come occupy as resources were available. The orangish lighter tan color is a common area that would host a public restaurant and common area for people in the building and at the research park to gather and discuss ideas and have really a fairly nice restaurant. And then the upper wing is not associated with the biotransform facility. That's associated with another project at South Dakota State through the College of Engineering, looking at makerspace for their students, undergraduate students, to engage in. So the second floor is another approximately 20,000 square feet of lab space. There's the high bay space, and then individual processing rooms, some shared laboratory space. And so the overall goal of the facility would be to engage with university researchers and industry partners to begin to spin off businesses and to take what we already have in the research labs at the university and move them into a pilot scale so that they could begin to move out to industry to show the viability of making these secondary, tertiary products to move out to industry as a viable business opportunity. And so that's kind of the stage we're in. These plans have been presented to a stakeholder group of legislators and industry partners. The engineering firm has met with faculty. They've met with industry stakeholders throughout the state and with the legislature and the governor's office, and have presented this up to this point. And so the next stage is to think about how do we begin to capitalize this and move it forward. If we look down, this is a schematic of what the facility would look like. So this is an existing building at the research park, and the wing on the left here, the 2-story wing, is the Biotransformation Center. The wing on this portion is the College of Engineering Center, and then here's the commons area with the restaurant and lounge facility. Back view of the facility in these architectural renderings. This is the bioprocessing, biotransformation facility. And so it's going to be a striking facility when complete, and will be a nice home for partnership between researchers at South Dakota State, South Dakota Mines, and a good opportunity to engage with industry throughout South Dakota and the region. Front view showing the lay of the land in terms of the architectural style to the existing buildings, and then the front view of the Biotransformation Center. It's going to be a stunning facility when it's lit up at night with all the researchers in there, and a little closer view of that front view. And then there's the common area. And there's still some work to do on the final architectural design of this. These are near complete, but not entirely complete plans. And that's looking down, a rendering looking down the wing of the building. So that's where we're at with this. And the next stage out, we've got one other engagement going on. We've re-engaged Strategic Avalanche, and they're taking a deeper dive into exactly what is the prime target for research for South Dakota that could occur in this facility. And we're looking primarily at food additives, nutrition, and then biochemicals and biochemistry, and biomaterials. We have purposely avoided the pharma realm. We think we may be a little too far behind the curve to take a dive into that with our existing faculty base. And so we can't do all things. And so we've targeted those other areas. Strategic Avalanche is meeting with partners, stakeholders, industry people. And as they do that, they're taking a deeper dive into those 4 targeted areas that were identified in the roadmap to determine what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, where our gaps are, and what's it take to actually make us competitive in that realm. And so I would stop and open it up for any questions anybody might have.
Does anyone have any questions for Ralph on this project? I think it sounds fantastic. I'm excited for us to have this opportunity, and I think it serves very well the industry that we have in our state, but also with the students. What a great learning experience that they can achieve and have, in addition to the industry partnerships that we will have. I think this will be exciting, and I'm anxious to see how this evolves. Yeah, Ralph, when does it start, and what are your next steps with this project?
So we'll be seeking some resources from the governor and the legislature again this year to begin to hire some of the initial staff, which would probably initially be technical people, high-level technical people that could begin to staff the facility and think about making equipment purchases and those kinds of things. And then the next stage, of course, is to capitalize it because you're looking at someplace between $27 and $34 million for the facility. And so we've got to come up with the capital investment to actually do the build. And so that will be the next major step. We're in the process of hiring an executive director who will engage industry and talk their talk and walk the walk and try to build a partner agreement with industry to get this capitalized along with the state of South Dakota. And so there is a timeline, and I can go down to that timeline. I think I've got it. Maybe I don't have it on this one. I think I've got it down here. So timeline, we're 2020 now. So funding the project out through 2021 and then staffing, construction to begin, we would hope in 2021, 2022. That's pretty aggressive. And so we will be rolling out to seek capital investment in the next few months, actually. So it's a fairly aggressive schedule, and we're really excited. We think it's going to be a great addition for South Dakota.
Boy, I couldn't agree more. And thank you for your leadership and the partnership that you have with SDSU. It's really fun to be able to see our universities work together. I know some of my state affiliates working in other states, the universities do not always do these types of collaborations. So we're very fortunate to have that here. And hopefully, you know, this ties in with a lot of what the governor's roles and missions are for the state and opportunities. So we see this as a big win, not just for our students and industry, but for our state as well, and as we're continuing to grow. So thank you very much, Ralph. Do you have any other last minute comments?
No, we're happy to be here. We're happy to be part of the Biotech Center, and we think this is a great addition to the overall operation throughout the state. It'll give us economic advantage. You know, we're shipping those products elsewhere now, and if we can create secondary and tertiary products off of those feedstocks, that's going to be good for the entire state.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ralph. So thank you so much for that update, and we look forward to more coming forward from you. So keep us posted, and we'll make sure that we send that out amongst our social media and in our some news blasts as the progress ensues. So thank you so much again, Ralph. Next up, we're going to jump right into our panel this afternoon. We have some very wonderful people that we are excited to have join us today, talk about some cutting edge things that are going on in their technologies. First we have Dr. Eddie Sullivan, Dr. Joe Jump, and Alan Berry. Steve Lewis, however, will be the moderator today. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. He is on my board. He's actually my vice president, and he also is a vice president of technology and innovation at POET. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to you, Steve. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joni. First off, I'd like to, before I welcome our panelists, I'd like to thank all of our participants today in our virtual summit. And I do want to take a moment again to thank all of our panelists, those attending online, for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know everyone is very busy right now, and I think hopefully the timing over lunch is good for everyone. I hope we find the information today that's going to be shared to be very helpful and informative. Joni's worked very hard in putting this panel together, and I think we've got a good lineup for you. We're honored to be joined today by Joe Jump, Staff Scientist with Novozymes, Alan Berry, Senior Director, Microbial Development with Novozymes, and Eddie Sullivan, CEO of SAB Biotherapeutics. And each of our panelists provide us expertise of their company's innovation and what their future looks like post-COVID-19 pandemic, opportunities and challenges in a COVID world. Thank you to all of our panelists.
So, Steve, I'm not sure if the slides are all stacked up, or we should just share from our own screens.
I think Joni.
Go ahead and get those. Marcy, lovely Marcy, has them all queued up for you guys.
That
So
looks
Joe,
good.
Joe, if you want to go ahead and start, she'll get you going.
All right, thank you. So, Marcy, I'll just say next slide when it comes time. But so in working with the organizers, Alan and I will tag team our experiences and give a survey of bioindustrial applications, and I'll focus more on the enzyme side. So next slide. Before going to Novozymes, a little bit about myself. So I'm born and raised from the state of Indiana. I graduated from Purdue University and with a BS in chemistry, and then moved on to Georgia Tech to get a PhD in organic chemistry. From there, in the 90s, I worked for a German company. Not many know of Herx Celanese, but some might know that. But after 5 years, I joined Novozymes in the year 2000 and have been with them ever since. So this would be my 20th year with Novozymes. So this slide is a kind of a glimpse at the company Novozymes, a snapshot. Basically, we are around 6,000 people with sales on the order of $3 billion. In R&D, we have about 1,500 people, and I think it's more like 7,000 patents now. So next slide. This gives a footprint of where Novozymes is today and has evolved from. So over those 20 years, I've seen a lot of changes, and we've added some dots to this global footprint. What once was a Danish company is now a global company with Danish origins. I like the saying of that, because the Danes agree that it's gotten kind of out of their hands where this whole thing is going. So every dot on this graph or slide actually indicates either R&D and or enzyme or microbial production. So you can see a lot going on. Next slide, please. Novozymes is extremely serious about sustainability, and So although our growth in sales and profit have gone up, we've been able to decouple our resources in water, energy, and CO2 over the years. So even though our profits and sales are doing quite well, we haven't had the need to have our resources climb with that. So we're very proud of that. Next slide, please. So in surveying bioindustrial enzyme applications, in a holistic view, I'd just like to say that you may or may not be aware of this, but we're all around, or enzyme applications are all around us. And I thought this YouTube video, if you can click on that, Marcy, should take us right to a 2-minute video outlining where things related to enzyme applications are.
These 7,000 minds power Novozymes, the world leader in biological solutions to improve industrial performance. What happens when these driven souls partner with customers who also are committed to aiming higher? An ordinary today leads to a brighter tomorrow. Welcome to San Diego, California, one of the largest cities in the United States and home to nearly 1.4 million people, including the Petersons. Meet Adam, Henry, Jen, and Grace. Like billions of people around the world, the Petersons benefit from Novozymes biological solutions every day. Our technology improves their coffee, cereal, juice, even the clothes they wear to the breakfast table. That's because Novozymes' purpose is to find biological answers for better lives in a growing world. For Grace, and for all the generations that will inherit tomorrow. Take transportation, where Novozymes enzymes have enabled the birth of the bioenergy industry, or the many foods and beverages where our solutions make a difference in daily life by removing lactose from milk, for example, increasing the yield in cheese production, and extending bread freshness to limit food waste. We invest 14% of our revenue in research and development. To create maximum impact in people's lives and ensure our customers' success, Novozymes teams up with partners in industries like leather and pulp and paper, and with thought leaders around the world. Our goal is to make a sustainable difference together and to help build our customers' business. It's that kind of partnership that enables families to clean clothes effectively in cold water, save energy, reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and replace chemicals. Together we treat wastewater, wash dishes, brew beer, make biopharmaceuticals, grow food, and feed animals more effectively and more responsibly. By 2020, Novozymes aims to reach 6 billion people with our biological answers for better lives in a growing world, just as we already are part of life for the Petersons. Let's rethink tomorrow together.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So Novozymes can't work in a vacuum, so we have... That's some good music. Sorry about that. That looks familiar. Like I was saying, Novozymes can't work in a vacuum with these applications. We do partner with many different companies out there of various diversities. So here's just a partial list. Next slide. For the audience who is interested in following up on some applications of enzymes and microbial applications as well, Novozymes TV was developed a couple of years ago, and I find it very useful to just give kind of updates on products and general biotechnology. So if you just go to YouTube, type in Novozymes TV, you'll get access to several videos that I think are actually pretty, they're short, some are longer, but they give a good overview of whatever you're interested in. So the default right now looks like it's coming up with brewing enzymes and starch enzymes. Next slide, please. Digging deeper into the agricultural value chain and applications within. This slide shows 3 different segments of that agricultural value chain. The one dealing with crops, Alan will take care of soon in his presentation. I'll go into one each of animal health and nutrition and also bioenergy. Next slide. So animal health and nutrition is all about making animals digest the food that it's fed better. So one enzyme application to showcase there is the use of an enzyme called phytase. What phytases do is release bound phosphate, which is in the natural environment. That's phytic acid, and it's totally locked up and useless to an animal. So what phytases do in the feed is help release that bound phosphate so that the animal can absorb it better. So that's, it's called the Ronozyme range of products. And so this is just one application of enzymes for animal health. Next slide. The next one is in bioenergy. This graph here, or this slide here, shows the what's in the middle is a bioethanol plant. So they take incoming corn and convert it into ethanol. There's a lot of good engineering design behind all that, and as well there's some good bioindustrial applications in the form of using yeast, which is a microbe, of course, but also some state-of-the-art enzymes as well. Together, they make that process very economical so that we enjoy the use of ethanol in all our gasoline today. And so where Novozymes has stepped in, aside from the enzyme part, is in the last couple of years have developed some pretty interesting yeast that can kind of compete well against traditional yeast in terms of stress tolerance, so that the already good process is much better now in terms of offering flexibility to ethanol producers. Next slide. Household care is a very large segment for bioindustrial applications. So what we mean by household care is shown at the kind of that top bar here, in terms of laundry as a household care application, as well as like dish and dishwashing liquids, professional cleaning, and probiotics. And Marcy, if you can play that video that's embedded, it's a really good video about the use of enzymes in a dishwashing application. Yep, yeah, just click on the arrow and then full screen is the, yep, you got it.
Most food stains are made up of a variety of different substances. These complex stains need a multi-enzyme detergent to fully degrade the stain. Each of these test tubes has exactly the same contents and illustrates the components of a complex food stain. We've marked the stain components with different colors and covered them in a colorless starch gel. Each enzyme will specifically target a different component of the stain. Now we add the detergent and enzymes. We are stirring the test tubes to simulate the mechanical action used to wash clothes. The enzymes start doing their job immediately. But the first test tube can't turn since there are no enzymes to help the detergent cut up the starch that surrounds the stain. The amylase in tube number 2, however, quickly breaks down the starch. Unless the detergent has more than just amylase in it, though, like the third test tube does, it can't cut up the rest of the stain. Here, the amylase cuts through the starch, giving the mannanase access to the mannan part of the stain. Meanwhile, the enzymes in test tube number 4 are quickly helping each other work through the stain. Just the pectin remains here, since there's no pectinase in the detergent. Only the last test tube has enough combined enzymatic power to fully degrade the complex stain. Here's how this translates into wash performance. Only a multi-enzyme detergent can completely and efficiently remove complex stains.
All right, thank you. So next slide. Food and beverages is another big area for bioindustrial enzyme applications. And this slide kind of shows the complexity again of the many different segments of food and beverage. So animal protein, baking, brewing, juice, wine, dairy, vegetable oil, those all fall under the food and beverage category, but they each have their own kind of personalities to them. Next slide. So the one I wanted to showcase was in the dairy area with consumer-facing applications like dairy, where we all consume dairy. Well, most of us consume dairy products, I think. There's a lot of details about what customers really care about in terms of that. And one of the leading things nowadays is low lactose dairy products for customer consumption. So I thought I'd showcase a new enzyme called SBIR fiber. It's not only a lactase, which if you look at the bottom of the slide, lactose is just a dimer of glucose galactose. SBIR fiber is a special lactase which actually converts the degrades the lactose, but also builds up sugar monomers into what is can be deemed as fiber. So it not only removes the lactose from the, say, milk product or yogurt product, it actually increases the fiber content by transferase enzyme activity. So that's kind of what all these dots are on the right-hand side of the slide. So I thought I'd show that as an interesting bio application. Next slide, please. The last slide I have to kind of showcase bioindustrial enzyme applications is kind of a look to the future. We got a lot of stuff cooking, but the one I'd like to just kind of show we're interested in this opportunity is for polyester recycling. So polyethylene terephthalate is a synthetic polymer, and Carbios and Novozymes has come to an agreement whereby we'll upscale that enzyme called cutinase, which is shown on the right-hand side of the slide. Cutinase is a special esterase enzyme that actually can degrade polyesters. There's plenty of polyesters in the natural world, like cutin. Cutin is a natural wax. It is a polyester. It's not PET per se, but it's close enough to get it to where it can react with polyethylene terephthalate to back to its monomeric units, which could be recycled. So that is, in a nutshell, my presentation. And at this point, I'll turn it back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Joe. I think we're going to go directly now to Alan's presentation. Alan Berry.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation to speak at this in this panel. Marcy, can you go to the next slide, please? So just a little bit about myself quickly. I'm originally from upstate New York and did my education in the SUNY system, followed by a postdoc at the University of Illinois Med School in Chicago. And for almost 30 years now, I've been in the industrial biotech industry at these companies you can see here. Most of that time was spent in metabolic engineering and strain engineering of microbes for overproduction of metabolites, small molecules, and enzymes. I had a short stint in pretty hardcore biopharmaceutical development at Bristol Myers Squibb, and then joined Novozymes in 2006. I spent the first 10 years at Novozymes in our research center in Davis, California, where I was heading all of our metabolic engineering R&D. and then managing the site there for a while. And then about 4 years ago, I transferred out here to Raleigh, where I'm in the Research Triangle Park research site of Novozymes, and I'm heading an area called microbial development. So I'll use that as a lead in to my next slide, please. So Novozymes is, as Joe said, I mean, we're primarily an enzyme company, no mistake about that. But we also have a growing business for a long time in whole live microorganisms, non-GM microorganisms, for a wide range of industrial applications. And we've built up this business over the years, but with a combination of internal development as well as quite a number of acquisitions. You can see since 2001, we've actually bought 16 companies who had products and technology in the microbial space. And I'll just walk you through this timeline a little bit because I think it's interesting to see how this has all evolved and what our journey has been. Back in 2001, Novozymes acquired a small group of companies in Salem, Virginia, near Roanoke, that was doing what I would think of as sort of traditional microbial product development. So this is the classic things you remember in things like septic tank treatments, drain cleaners, water treatment, and also aquaculture, microorganisms that were used to detoxify these large shrimp and fish ponds in aquaculture industry. And then around 2003, we made a number of acquisitions in the bioag space. And what we mean by bioag is microorganisms that are used to improve crop health or plant health. And that can be achieved in a number of different ways. I'll come to that in a later slide. So we acquired quite a number of companies in that space. In 2013, we acquired Iogen. And most of you who know Iogen would remember them as an enzyme company, actually developing enzymes for cellulosic ethanol. But as Joe indicated, we have quite a business now in biofuel yeast, and some of that is made up in the former Iogen facility in Ottawa. We got into animal health and nutrition through a combination of internal development as well as acquisition. So starting in 2012, we began the development of a product called Alterion. I'll come back to that later. And then in 2015, we acquired, oops, I'm seeing something here, sorry. Okay, oops. We acquired a company called Pacific Vet Group, which was a spin out from the University of Arkansas that was working on microorganisms for gut health, mainly in chicks and in poultry. In household care, Joe mentioned that's a very large, the largest segment of our business, I believe, in enzymes, but we also have a microbial business in household care. Traditionally, back in time, these were hard surface cleaners and things like that, and I mentioned drain cleaners. But now we're talking about what we call home probiotics. So these are organisms that are applied to surfaces that are actually intended to stay there and keep your surfaces clean and free of pathogens and things like that. In 2016, up to now, we've had a very heavy focus in human health. With an acquisition of a company in Berlin called OrganoBalance. And then just a few months ago, we closed an acquisition for a company in Cork, Ireland called Precision Biotics. And I'll come back and talk about those as well. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so I'm going to talk now about bioag for a few slides here. So this is just a summary of our product portfolio in bioag. So again, these are microorganisms that are produced that we sell for seed treatment, in furrow application, in a wide variety of crops. So the 5 areas we play in are nitrogen fixation, phosphate solubilization, general plant nutrition, which means basically yield improvement, bushels per acre, biocontrol, which is microorganisms that kill or inhibit the growth of other microorganisms that are pathogenic to the plants. And then finally, it's not really a microbe, but we have molecules called LCO that are signaling molecules that can be applied to seeds to improve plant robustness. Next slide, please. So here's an example of our microbial supplied nitrogen technology. And for the microbiologists in the audience, this is really old rhizobium, Brady rhizobium inoculant business. We're the world's biggest producer of these inoculants for legumes like soybeans. And these are the classic symbiotic relationship of rhizobia with the soybean roots to form a nodule on the root and provide nitrogen to the plants. That's a classic business. Our site, for example, in Milwaukee has been there for 100 years producing these inoculants, but it still remains a very large part of our bioag business. And we continue to innovate in that business, bringing new products to the market. We're also working in nitrogen fixation for non-legumes like corn. This is a very interesting area for a lot of companies right now. And the intent here is to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that needs to be added to the land using microorganisms that can provide fixed atmospheric nitrogen and provide the nitrogen to the plant in situ. Next slide. This is another example, but it's phosphate and plant nutrition technology. So on the top part of the slide, these are technologies that liberate phosphorus in the soil and make it available to the plants. This technology came into Novozymes by our acquisition of a company up in Saskatoon called Phylum Bios back in the mid-2000s. And they had a product called Jumpstart, which is a fungus called penicillin bilii. And what that does is it lives and grows around the roots of the crops, and it solubilizes phosphorus in the soil and makes it in a form available to the plants. That's been quite a successful product for us. We also have other plant nutrition technologies in our pipeline that we're co-developing with our partner Bayer, who's a large partner of ours in a lot of the microbial space. And this would be really aimed at improving corn yields through better plant nutrition. Next slide. Yeah, this is the molecule I mentioned earlier. It's an LCO or lipocyto-oligosaccharide. This is well-known technology for a long time. Essentially what these do when you apply them to seeds, when the seeds germinate, it promotes mycorrhizal colonization of the roots in the soil and increases root volume as well as water and nutrient uptake through the roots. And you can see in the photos are some dramatic pictures of plants that were grown with LCO versus not. And you can see the effect on the root length and robustness. Yeah, and we're also market this through our partner Bayer. Next slide. Yeah, this is the last bioag example, and this is actually in the biocontrol space. So this is a biofungicide called Tegro, which is a bacterium called Bacillus amylophaciens. It's a broad spectrum biofungicide, and you can see in the photos here, I should mention here, our partner, launch partner and distribution partner for this product is Syngenta. So on the top left, you see example of roots with and without treatment with Tegro. So this would be an in-soil treatment of the roots. And on the top right photo, you can see the effect of Tegro in a foliar or leaf application where we spray it on the plants, in this case, a tomato nursery. And you can see the improvement on the left you get when applying Tegro. In the bottom, there's a couple cool pictures showing where we've labeled with green fluorescent protein or red fluorescent protein our Tegro, and the red is a fungal pathogen. On the left-hand side, that is a photo of immediately after spraying both organisms onto a leaf surface. And on the right side, after a period of time, and we've had germination growth of the Tegro bacillus strain, you can see that it essentially takes over and pretty much wipes out the fungus from the leaf surface. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to animal health and nutrition. Joe mentioned this because for a long time we've had a business in enzymes for animal health and nutrition, but we also sell microbes into this area. I mentioned earlier a product called Alterion, which is a bacillus probiotic that's used in feed for adult poultry to manage digestive problems. And here we have a partner called Adissio that markets distributes the product for us. I'll skip down to the third line here because I should have mentioned Alterion was developed internally. And on the third line here, this is another product that was developed internally. This is called Pond Detox, and it's for aquaculture. So this is a a mixture of bacillus bacteria and some non-spore forming bacteria that manage the production of hydrogen sulfide and sludge in these very large, highly dense shrimp farms, for example. And here are our partners, Bayer. On the second row, this is a product called Floramax. This was a product that we got through our acquisition of Pacific Vet Group in Arkansas. It's a combination of bacillus and lactic acid bacteria for chicks to establish a stable gut flora, and also helps control salmonella. And here we have a partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim. On the bottom, finally, we're developing bacillus and lactic acid bacteria for cattle, targeting GI problems. That's with a partner at Elanco. We don't have a product to show there yet, but stay tuned. Next slide. I mentioned household care, and we have a number of microbial products in household care. Some of them I'm not at liberty to speak about because of relationships with our partners who market those products, but this one I can talk about. This is our own internal product called Microvia. This was launched literally about 2 weeks ago. It's a combination of several bacillus bacteria that collectively produce up to 70 different enzymes that work to keep your surfaces in your home clean. So the enzymes, the organisms stay on the surface, they get into all the nooks and crannies, so to speak, and secrete enzymes that will break down residue, including food components like starch, protein, fats, and so on, similar to what Joe showed in the video. Next. Okay, so this is the last section. It's about human health, Novozymes' venture into human health. And we call this Novozymes One Health because we're running this business quite differently from the rest of Novozymes' traditional business. On to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a busy slide, but it describes, you know, the concept of how we're approaching the human health industry as Novozymes. And what I want to just direct your attention to is what I circled with the red circle there, that we're operating the human health business in Novozymes as a venture business. So think of it as a startup company within Novozymes. So it's really a different mindset. It's very exciting and lots of energy. And we think we're on have a very good start down this path with the acquisitions that we've made. Next slide. So Pylopass is a human health product. This came to Novozymes through our acquisition of Organobalance in Berlin. And this is an interesting product because the microbe is actually inactivated. So it's not alive. This is think of it as a dead cell product. But what this product does when you ingest it is it binds to Helicobacter pylori, which is the organism that causes stomach ulcers, and ties it up so that it can't continue to infect, and essentially escorts it out of your digestive system. So it can reduce the amount of Helicobacter in your stomach. Next slide. And with our Precision Biotics acquisition, this is the one we just made earlier this year. They have two probiotic products called Aflorex and Zenflor, which are used for gastrointestinal health and also for control of stress. Next slide. Yeah, this is just to show that in addition to the acquisitions and partnerships that we have quite a good academic foundation. We've assembled a really strong scientific advisory board and have links to a lot of very high-power universities and institutes to support our human health business. And last slide, I believe. Next. Yeah. And this is just to mention that we have a really rich pipeline coming to Novozymes through this One Health initiative. You know, on the top left, we talk about gluten tolerance and lactose intolerance. On the right, metabolic health, so glucose control. On the bottom left, control of Clostridium and irritable bowel syndrome. And then finally, on the bottom right, some products that are going to be aimed for the oral care market. Okay, so that was all that I have. That's a very fast rundown of Novozymes' activities in the microbial space. And if there's time for a question, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Alan. We'll do questions at the end of our last presentation. Very impressive, though. It is really exciting to see all the areas that biotechnology is safely impacting society. I'd like to now introduce Eddie Sullivan, CEO of SAB Biotherapeutics. Eddie is doing some amazing work And I think we'd all agree that Eddie is showing that South Dakota is not flyover country when it comes to innovation in biotechnology. Eddie, take it over.
Thanks, Steve. It's good to be with you today and with everyone. Give you a little bit of an update on what SAB Biotherapeutics is doing. I'm going to focus the presentation a little bit today on specifically what we're doing with COVID-19. But of course, what we represent is really a new class of immunotherapies, and I'm going to explain exactly what that means as part of the discussion on how we are addressing COVID. So if we go to the next slide, of course, we are a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company. We have this platform technology to produce really potent, fully human polyclonal antibodies to target unmet medical needs. And what makes that unique is that our technology really represents the only platform technology in the world that can produce fully human polyclonal antibodies outside of human donors. And so this gives us a broad therapeutic reach across infectious diseases, autoimmune diseases, inflammation, and oncology. And right now, SAB is currently involved in 3 clinical trials with our products. We are working with the Rapid Response Antibody Program within the U.S. Department of Defense. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because it's really an interesting story on how we, even got involved in the response to COVID, even prior to any of us hearing about the pandemic. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean about that. Just over the last few months, we have doubled our manufacturing capacity. Now, we're currently expanding 10 times the manufacturing capacity within our current facility, and that's still not enough. We'll continue to do more, but we have increased approximately 550% in our production capacity. And that means we've also had to double our plasma production facilities with our animals here in South Dakota, and we have additional construction underway. And just since December of last year, we have increased over 60% in the number of employees. And so we currently have over 80 employees. A great deal of that growth has happened through our contracting with the Department of Defense and secured currently about $72 million in funding, and also closing a Series B round of a little over 14 million. And part of that was an investment by Merck that was coupled with the addition to our scientific advisory board of Dr. Scott Leslie, who's the Vice President of Discovery Biologics at Merck. And so we continue to advance our program very organically and ensure that we are growing appropriately, but also trying to meet this sort of surge response and being able to provide a solution or one of the solutions to the current pandemic. Next slide. So actually it was mid 2019 when SAB got involved with this program of rapid response and being able to take a pathogen and determine how we could bring that pathogen as an antigen into our system, immunize these very unique animals that we have that we call transchromosomic bovine that produce fully human polyclonal antibodies, target those antibodies specifically to a disease of interest, extract the antibodies from the plasma and purify them and use them as a new therapeutic. And so this technology has been building over time, but we have now built it to be able to produce the polyclonal antibodies, hyperimmunize them so they have extreme potency to the target of interest. This technology, while it is novel and unique, has a well-established and understood regulatory pathway through the FDA, through SBIR, and also the Center of Veterinary Medicine that regulates transgenic animals, particularly farm animals. But our products have shown efficacy against mutated virus strains and the ability to bind multiple targets from multiple antibodies to single antigens through multiple epitopes. And this is very important as we think about how disease mutates. And so Again, a broad therapeutic approach through infectious diseases, inflammation, autoimmune, and oncology, and we do have preliminary programs in all of these areas. And what we are building is a fully vertically integrated system to be able to produce the antigens here at SAB, vaccinate the animals, produce the products, and then move those into the clinic. Next slide. So when we got into this program of emerging diseases, the first program that we really took into the clinic, as it turns out, was Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus. And what's unique and maybe a little different than the current pandemic is that MERS is primarily a disease that passes from camels to humans, and thus it's called Middle Eastern, since that's where a vast majority of dromedary camels are located and interact with humans. But it is a coronavirus. It's slightly different than the SARS-CoV-2 virus that infects or that causes COVID-19, in that it does bind to a different receptor. But we used exactly the same technology that we used in developing SAB-301 to MERS coronavirus as we did to the SARS-CoV-2. But it turns out that this also was a great opportunity for us to show the safety of our products in humans. And so this was our first phase 1 clinical trial. It was conducted by NIH a little over 2 years ago. And we were able to confirm, in fact, that the antibodies from these animals act exactly like human-derived human antibodies when transferred to patients. And so it has a 28-day half-life. We didn't have any anti-drug antibodies detected, despite having a half-life of 28 days and following the antibodies out to several half-lives. We still did not detect any anti-drug antibodies. There was no immunogenicity to the affinity ligands that we used to purify the antibodies, and we had no immunogenicity to bovine plasma proteins. So we purify it to such a level that the bovine plasma proteins are not detectable by the human immune system. Next slide. So why would we use polyclonal antibodies? And I want to just make the distinction here that these are fully human antibodies, not humanized. What that means is that the entire protein sequence of the antibodies that we produce are human. It has high diversity and natural properties that really we are unable to duplicate in monoclonal antibodies or even combinations of monoclonal antibodies. This really is the natural way that our immune system fights disease. And so it provides a highly specific, matched against the complexity, the diversity, and the mutation of disease, meaning we can target it to disease, but it is really activating and working with the entire immune system in order to fight any particular disease. And a polyclonal means that we reduce the likelihood of the virus becoming resistant to our products. So many antibodies means that you're binding to multiple sites on this virus, and it's very difficult for that virus to then mutate in such a way that it is going to become resistant to the antibodies that we're producing in a polyclonal fashion. Whereas antivirals or monoclonals, when you put pressure on these biological systems, they can actually have escape mutants that will grow up and become dominant that are ineffective to either antivirals or monoclonals. So for instance, all of us know about Tamiflu, an antiviral that's used to fight the influenza virus, but it turns out that Tamiflu, in fact, has become resistant over time. Let's go to the next slide. So this just represents some data that we have published recently, along with Dr. Jay Hooper at the U.S. Army Infectious Disease Research Institute in Fort Detrick, Maryland, where it just shows that when you put pressure with a monoclonal antibody or even a combination of monoclonal antibodies on a virus, they can mutate in such a way that they become ineffective. But all of these mutations, in fact, were susceptible to SAB-159, in this case, SAB's product, to hantavirus. Next slide. So that's why we have presented SAB at 185 as a product to treat the COVID pandemic response. We have been able to rapidly respond and produce antibodies that are specific to this. This augments the benefits of human convalescent plasma while overcoming some of the challenges associated with using convalescent plasma. For one thing, locating convalescent plasma can often be difficult, and you have to test for it, and it's highly variable. So we can overcome some of that with our closed system of being able to produce these products. And then, of course, we have had a tremendous amount of experience in multiple infectious diseases and produced more than a dozen therapeutic antibody products to infectious diseases since 2014. Next slide. So in response to the pandemic, and by the way, in 2019, we had no idea that we would be putting to test our rapid response to emerging diseases so quickly. And of course, we started very early on to look at the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the COVID pandemic and determined that we would be able to respond. And so in doing so, we are able to produce a product in as little as 90 days and then prepare that product to go into preclinical and clinical development. Next slide. So that's exactly what we've done. And so we have now initiated 2 clinical trials for SAB 185, our anti-COVID product. In fact, this product is one of 3 new therapeutics that is part of the BARDA's medical countermeasure portfolio, and we are progressing with Operation Warp Speed to go into advanced clinical trials. And so we completed manufacturing of the products in June, and in just 7 weeks, we confirmed production of potent neutralizing antibodies to this virus. And so we were able to move very, very rapidly and get this into the clinic. And of course, we continue to partner with both BARDA and with the Department of Defense. Next slide. So this is the 2 clinical trials. Both of these are safety trials. However, the one is in healthy volunteers. It's being conducted at multiple sites, including SUNY in Syracuse, the medical center there, as well as centers in Austin, Texas. And then the phase 1B is actually in ambulatory COVID patients. These are both randomized, double-blinded studies wherein we are looking at safety of the disease. And of course, in the phase 1B in actual patients, we are monitoring the ability of the antibodies to stop the progression of the disease from causing serious illness. So we are part of Operation Warp Speed now and expect to move into advanced clinical trials within the next few weeks. This is an adaptive design protocol, which is something very new to this highly regulated industry, wherein you will begin the efficacy trials as part of a phase 2. There will be an interim analysis in which you will adjust either the dose levels or the number of patients that are needed in the protocol, and we'll move forward to licensure, which we expect to have early in 2021. Next slide. So these are just some of the products that we're currently working on. Of course, COVID being the one that we're advancing most rapidly. We also have a seasonal influenza product that we're working on. And of course, I think all of us have heard some of the news about concern about they're calling it the twindemic, the concern that seasonal influenza and COVID can actually act together as respiratory diseases. And so SAB has products to both seasonal influenza as well as COVID. We are working very hard on some autoimmune diseases as well, including type 1 diabetes and a human immune globulin that can be used for some of the off-label indications for which we use human-derived intravenous immunoglobulin. And so we're very excited about our pipeline and moving these things forward in a way that not only provides a potential solution to this very serious pandemic, but also is showing the power and potential of the platform that we've developed here. Next slide. So I just want to recognize that none of this is done in a vacuum, and has already been said, there's a lot of people, a lot of great people that are involved in this, and we appreciate them very much, that come to us with a lot of great background and knowledge of the industry and being able to move very quickly into these clinical trials. And lastly, on the next slide, we have also been working very hard to develop a scientific advisory board with a number of members that work with some of the greatest universities across the country and in fact across the world. And so we are very excited to be here in South Dakota to be able to offer what our platform technology represents in being able to help patients around the world. So with that, I thank you, Steve. And
thank you, Eddie. Very impressive. I'd like to again thank all of our panelists today, and we're definitely making a better world. It's amazing to see all the applications of biotechnology, industrial biotech, ag biotech, healthcare biotech. But I don't know about everyone else out there, but I'm energized. And now I'd like to start it out with some questions for our panel. I think we have about 15 minutes, just shy of 15 minutes left for questions. So you can submit them either via typing them in, or I'm going to start out with a few here. Since you just finished up, Eddie, I'm going to start out with you regarding regulatory pathways. How streamlined are they now? Is policy catching up with the science? It sounds like you've done a great job in working with the regulatory agencies. And can you speak a little bit on why we need science-based regs?
Well, absolutely. And I think that this is critically important. I think there's been a lot of controversy, and of course, there's always a lot of politics involved when you're dealing with these kinds of things. But it is so critically important that however we respond rapidly, we also respond effectively and follow the science. And that's critically important. And of course, randomized double-blinded studies that allow you to look at both safety and efficacy in a way that ensures the integrity and the interpretation of the data are correct. And so while we want to move rapidly, and while there is always concern that while it seems like it takes so long to do these things, that we want to ensure, first of all, that whatever we develop in being able to answer a serious pandemic is not adding any harm, certainly. And certainly, if we're going to promote it as something that's helpful, it needs to be proven. And so that does take time. It takes time to generate that data. I do think, Steve, that there has been a tremendous amount of innovation on how we can move things more rapidly through the system and still maintain data integrity and the regulatory process that ensures that we have a safe and effective product.
That is very reassuring, Eddie. I've got a question for all the panelists, and Joe, you and I have talked a little bit about this, but can you speak to the ability of biotechnology? When we think about what you guys are doing in the industrial space, you're really marrying biology with engineering. And can you speak to that and give some examples? Eddie, you're doing the same thing. Your cows are your production facilities. And Joe, can you hear me?
Seems like, there he is.
Are you muted?
He might have dropped off for a second. I think he disappeared.
And Alan, how about you take a crack at that one? The marriage of biology and engineering. Or do you see any differences between development and launch of enzymes versus microbes? It sounds like just 2 weeks ago, you've got a product that's both.
Yeah, sorry, Steve, you were breaking up just a little bit. I couldn't hear the question.
Okay. We talked about the marriage of biology with engineering, but I think one of the things that intrigues me is that now Novozymes is launching enzymes and microbes together in one package. Is that going to be a trend of the future?
I think absolutely. You know, even you saw we have enzymes in the animal health industry for some of the same types of applications, and now we have microbial products. So it seems inevitable that you'll see microbes and enzymes used in the same way. It's a little bit different in the sense of, Eddie mentioned the regulatory. One of the key differences between enzyme development and launch and microbes is that in microbes, particularly if you're talking about a biocontrol application, the regulatory framework is much more onerous than an enzyme. So a microbe for biocontrol that will, for example, kill a fungal pest in the roots of a crop can take 6 or 7 years to get to the market, versus an enzyme, which is relatively straightforward. You know, so you're talking about releasing live microorganisms into the environment or into the food chain. So the regulatory hurdles are a bit different. So that would have to be aligned somehow also with the enzyme, you know, the enzyme timelines.
Interesting. Thanks, Alan. It occurs to me that ag biotechnology, one of the big areas in ag biotech is keeping our livestock disease free. And it's taken on a new sense of urgency now that you're using livestock as production facilities, Eddie. How do you keep your animals healthy? You're using them as production facilities, and I believe that you've deleted the bovine immune response to some degree, so that the human immune response can be initiated in your cows. How do you keep your animals healthy?
Well, a couple of things about that are very unique to the system that we're using. One is that, first of all, the human antibody genes that we use actually respond very well to the animal vaccines that these animals are given to keep them healthy. Also to diseases that we might see in these animals in the upper Midwest area. One of the reasons that we are located here, among other reasons, is that this is a really great environment in which to raise cattle. And in fact, we have a low incidence of disease compared to some other parts of the country or the world. And yet we still maintain biosecurity in our facilities in order to be able to control all of the inputs and all of the things that come into our production facilities. Steve, there was someone who asked specifically about whether we use whole inactivated viruses or specific proteins in our animals to produce these antibodies. And I just wanted to say that we in fact don't use a whole inactivated virus. We use the entire spike protein on the virus for producing these antibodies, and that has a great neutralizing capability. And in fact, we have now produced antibodies that are 400 times more potent than the highest convalescent plasma antibodies that we've been able to compare them to.
Interesting. Eddie, how many treatments can the typical animal provide? So
these animals can produce up to 45 liters of antibody every month, and the amount of antibody that each animal produces is about 15 grams per liter. And what's interesting in comparing some of the efficacy data that we're learning from convalescent plasma, we will be able to dose at fairly low levels, as low as 1 to 5 milligrams per kilogram in humans. And so what this means is that each animal will be able to produce several thousand doses a month.
Fascinating. Alan, I've got a question for you regarding the crop protection programs. And it seems like the knowledge of evolutionary effects is very important, not only to what Eddie's doing, but also to what you're doing in the in the area of crop control and crop protection against pests. But isn't it an ongoing battle? Is it constantly evolving? You have to constantly try to stay ahead of the game?
Well, honestly, I would say at this point, I would say we don't know. You know, part of the reason for looking for microbial pest control is that because of resistance to chemical pesticides. So, you know, it's something that can work together with, you know, the typical things that are added. You know, there's on a corn seed, for example, there's multiple chemicals that are added to those seeds to prevent them from becoming diseased or rotting or whatever during storage. So the microbes are there to provide an extra layer of protection. But I can't say at this point that we have seen evidence for evolution of pests to be resistant to our microbes.
Interesting. It was really impressive. Novozymes is a very innovative company to begin with, but I think it's interesting for our attendees to note that you've really developed a way of doing innovation and venture, almost a venture capital approach within a large organization. Can you speak to that a little bit more? How has the company accepted that and come to that recognition that that was necessary?
Well, I think particularly in a space like human health, it's inevitable that you need to be nimble and agile in how you approach things. And that doesn't necessarily fit with our traditional enzyme business, where we have a long-standing, you know, product development pipeline stage gate process. So we want to give these new, what we call strategic opportunity areas, every possible advantage so that they can be successful. So it is kind of, they have these organizations have their own management and their own R&D resources, and they are pretty much left alone. And I think we need to operate that way. It's to take something that new for us and try to force fit it into our traditional product development pipeline is probably not the best way to succeed.
I've got a question from the chat area. How does a large company like Novozymes manage enzymes and microbial products that could be used for different applications across different industries?
Sorry, what was the question? How do we make them?
How does a large company like Novozymes manage enzymes and microbial products that could be used for different applications across different industries? I think they're asking, what if you have one enzyme that can be sold in multiple industries, or a microbial product that can be sold in multiple industries?
Well, we have a lot of partnerships and we have some exclusive relationships, but it is a challenge. I mean, they have to be managed carefully so that we are not, you know, violating any of the terms of our agreements with our partners. But certainly a lot of our products are sold across multiple industries, both in microbes and in enzymes for different applications. So I don't know if I have a very clear answer other than it does take a lot of careful management.
I doubt that many of our other panelists have been on the Colbert Show, but I've been dying to ask Eddie how that experience went. I think you were on the Colbert Show, weren't you, Eddie, about 4 months ago? And
well, actually, I think that was a bit of a spoof on us that came from an interview I did on CNN, but that's okay because we don't mind a little humor, particularly when there are a lot of people in the world that are suffering and we have the potential to help. And so we appreciate the fact that we can find some humor in anything, but it's a very serious disease, and we hope that we have something that can be helpful.
When are we going to see you more in the national news, Eddie? I think, of course, we're all aware of the political situation. I think you could go a long way to helping not only prior to the election, but post-election. I think the outlook of many of the people in the United States.
Yeah, there'll definitely be more news coming out as we continue to develop this product and others. And we're excited for that.
One thing I'd like to thank all the panelists on is your level of commitment to educating the public on biotechnology. The Novozymes products are in just about every every consumer product that we can think of, and it's safely being used, and many times the public is not even aware of it. And Eddie, your technology is going to be able to go a long way toward making a safer future for all of us in the post-COVID world. Any last thoughts from you, Eddie, and Alan, and Joe? I don't know if you made it back on, but any last thoughts on education?
I think we want people to know that this technology has a lot more potential. There's a lot more to discover out there, and this is an exciting area, but it's not for the faint of heart. We have a lot of work to do, and I hope for those that are considering a career in this area that you would see that there really is a bright future.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I was going to kind of say the same thing, Eddie, is I don't think there's ever enough education that one can do or a company can do. And, you know, I've been with Novozymes 20 years now, and we were saying the same thing back then. It's the same thing as you just got to educate to keep the public as much in awareness of biotechnology as you can. So I think we do a pretty good job, and I just like seeing that in the front and center of our ambitions. So I like teaching too, so it's fun.
Thank you all. I think we've reached a couple minutes over our time commitment, but I would like to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. Thanks to our panelists and our attendees. For more information on today's summit or the biotech industry in South Dakota, please go to our website, www.sdbio.org, or contact Joni Johnson at jjohnson@southdakotabio.org. And again, a reminder, a recording of this presentation will be shared with you in the coming days, and we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Thanks again. Thanks to all.
Thank you.